everyone. Thanks for joining us. I have Dr. Kristen Tsai today, and she will be speaking to us about an unofficial guide to medical school. She was born in the Midwest to first-generation Taiwanese immigrant parents, and she went to college at Harvard, and she majored in biochemistry, and she also attended Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons for medical school here in New York. She completed her residency in internal medicine at Oregon Health and Science University and is currently an internal medicine and inpatient physician at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. She is also heavily involved in the medical school, and some of her responsibilities include being on the admissions committee, teaching first-year medical students, advising students, co-directing a fourth-year rotation. She's a busy woman. And on top of all of that, she is the medical director of the non-resident. Yeah. Some of her interests include quality improvement and system level changes, as well as physician and student wellness. Dr. Kristen, thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited for your presentation, and you can take it on from here.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much, Amina, for the very kind introduction. Welcome to those who are here or those of you who are listening afterwards. Today I wanted to talk about a topic that I think is pretty important, something that I went through myself when I was in high school and college, thinking about what I wanted to do with my future, and something now that I serve on the faculty at Rush University Medical Center and also on the admissions committee, I take a lot of interest in. So my topic for today is an unofficial guide for getting into medical school. So some disclaimers, and the reason I say it's an unofficial guide rather than an official guide is that the first part of my talk, I'll be really talking about my own journey to give you an example of how one person got into medical school and what that's like, journey has been like becoming a physician. Two, it does not guarantee entry into medical school. Certainly, I think attending this webinar, hopefully you will learn some things that will help you be more successful in an application to medical school, but it doesn't guarantee. Thirdly, I want to clarify that this presentation is not officially endorsed by Rush Medical College or the medical college that I work for, but it is based off of some of my experience working in this medical college. And fourth point, I just want to point out that you guys are in high school right now, and so by the time you are applying to medical school, the world, the environment, and things that may have changed a little bit. So it will be very, very important when you are in the actual process of applying that you meet with a pre-medical advisor or meet with physicians who are practicing at that time to figure out what's up to date and what things have stayed the same relative to this presentation, and maybe what things have changed. So to just talk a little bit about where I came from and what my journey has been like, as Amina mentioned, I was born in the Midwest in Iowa, actually, to first-generation Taiwanese immigrant parents. So my parents came over to the United States for graduate school. They both ended up at the University of Iowa studying engineering, computer science. And then we very quickly moved to Illinois. I grew up mostly in the Chicago suburbs as an only child. For high school, I went to the Illinois Math and Science Academy. It's a state-funded boarding school that takes about 200 students from the state to live there and study. For college, I went to Harvard and I majored in biochemical sciences. And then for medical school, I was at Columbia in New York City. After that, as Amina mentioned, I went to residency, which all medical school graduates need to do in order to be a practicing physician. I went to residency and I chose internal medicine as my specialty, and I matched at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon, which was a great facility, great hospital, great training grounds. And currently, I work as a hospitalist at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. Some people may be wondering what a hospitalist is. I certainly didn't know, even when I was in medical school. When I first started, I had never heard of it because the field is fairly young. It's about 20 years old. But essentially, I focus on adult medicine and not children. I focus on internal medicine, which is a lot of the internal organs that you think about when you think of a doctor taking care of patients: the heart, the lungs, infections, the stomach, the liver, things like that. So a little bit of everything in internal medicine. And I focus on inpatient medicine. So these are patients who, they're not coming to see me in a clinic, but they're really sick enough that they need to stay overnight in the hospital for some reason or another. That's a picture of me hiking out in Oregon during my residency, and behind me is Mount Hood. A couple pictures of my childhood. It was a pretty happy time. Again, we didn't come from a ton of money. It was pretty humble beginnings. We weren't poor by any stretch of the imagination either. But those are just a couple pictures from when I was a small child. I'll dig a little bit deeper into exactly what my schooling years looked like, since it'll allow you to sort of compare where you've come from and where I came from. But essentially, I attended a suburban public school for elementary school. There were some small gifted programs that would take us out of class a couple days a week that I was a part of. Overall, I was a pretty good student. I practiced piano. I was pretty sort of classic Asian American child. I went to Kumon, which is a tutoring program for math and verbal skills, to try to sort of advance beyond the regular classroom. And also, just so you don't think that I only spent my time studying and doing nothing fun, practicing piano, I also spent time just playing with the kids and enjoying my time chasing after the ice cream truck and those sorts of things in the summers. For high school, my first year, I actually attended a regular, large suburban public high school. And then I was taking some pretty high-level science and math classes. And those are the advantage of taking some gifted classes, is that you can sort of advance compared to some of your classmates when you're learning things a little bit faster. Sophomore through senior year, I went to the state-funded math and science boarding school. It's a 3-year school. And during that time, I actually did start to delve into a little bit of research, bench research. Specifically at Northwestern, I was studying Alzheimer's disease in a lab, learning exactly how laboratories work, how graduate students may be conducting research, and spent quite a bit of time doing that, both during the school year, 1 day a week, and also during my summers off. Then between my junior and senior year in high school, I attended something called the Research Science Institute at MIT. This is geared towards high school students between their junior and senior year. So if you're in your junior year right now, or even in your sophomore year, something you might, if you have the credentials for it, think about applying for the Research Science Institute. It takes about 50 students from across the country and matches them up with mentors in the Boston area to do some summer research. And outside of my research during high school, some of the extracurriculars that I attended and participated in were the school yearbook, for which I started out being just a member, kind of doing a little bit of everything, eventually became photo chief, photo editor, and then became editor-in-chief my senior year. And I also was on the math team for a short period of time. So just a picture of what labs look like. This particular picture is not me, it's just a representation. And then a picture of my high school, which you can see very much Midwest, lots of green around it, lots of cornfields, and that was the campus right there. College, so I applied to a variety of different colleges, and I thought about both going to 4-year programs and also considering some of the combined programs, and I was accepted both into Harvard and as well as Northwestern 7-year combined program. Those of you who are very, very certain that you want to go into medicine, some of the combined programs are nice. There are both 6-year, 7-year, and 8-year programs throughout the country. There's a handful of them. And the benefit to those is that it guarantees your entrance into medical school as long as you've done well in your undergraduate years. I ended up choosing to go to Harvard because I kind of wanted that experience of having been from the Midwest, living on the East Coast, going to a good school. And so that's why I chose Harvard. And when I was there, I was very involved in the Taiwanese Student Association. I rode house crew for a little period of time. I did some volunteering both in hospitals and at the business school. As mentioned before, I majored in biochemistry, although I really did consider some other fields as well. When you go into medicine, you don't have to major in a science in order to successfully gain entry into medical school. I thought about majoring in East Asian studies. I thought about majoring in government, in social studies. There are a couple different things. I have friends who majored in art history and English, and they were all successful in getting into medical school, primarily because all pre-meds have to take a certain number of pre-medical classes. That includes regular inorganic chemistry, it includes organic chemistry, includes mathematics, includes biology and physics. So even if you major in something that is not science, you have to take the science classes and prove that you can do well in those classes. And last, I wanted to note that during my senior year, I did apply to medical school. I didn't end up taking time off between college and medical school, and I applied, but I did think maybe I should. It's very, very common these days for folks to take maybe 1 to 3, 4, even 5 years, sometimes as a second career, take time off before starting medical school. So I looked into jobs such as teaching and maybe working in industry, consulting, things like that. For medical school, and I'll get a little bit more into the journey itself, but I was accepted to Columbia, and that's where I chose to attend. And even during that time, I explored some other interests outside of pure clinical medicine. I thought about, should I get a master's in business administration, an MBA? I thought about, should I get a master's in public health to better understand healthcare from a big system standpoint, from a public health standpoint? Or would I be most suited to do research? There's lots of people who do things like MD, PhDs, or maybe if not so much as a PhD, which can take quite a few years and is quite a commitment, even just a year or two, do I want to be involved in research of some kind to help advance the field of medicine? Those were things that I thought about. Ultimately, I completed my medical school year in 4 years, so that's the standard when you don't do an MBA, an MPH, or extra research or a PhD. I was initially interested in becoming a neurosurgeon. That was what brought me into medicine in the first place. I had shadowed some neurosurgeons and thought it was amazing to be in the operating room and really a pretty neat field. But ultimately, I decided based off of my personality and my interests that internal medicine was actually the best suited for me. I really like to see a variety of different things, and I really like spending time talking to people. And as a consequence, internal medicine turned out to be a great fit. And I just wanted to comment that I love living in New York City. It's such a vibrant place. And for those of you who are there, you're very lucky to be there. So I think it's important to talk about in anyone's journey any roadblocks, stumbles, or challenges that they faced. So I had a gap year. This is not something I officially would ever recommend to anybody, but sometimes it's necessary. So in my case, my mother was very unfortunately diagnosed with metastatic cancer right before I started medical school. And she was young, she was 49. And that journey of me being with her throughout her diagnosis and her treatments has really shaped me who I am today and what kind of physician I am. She fought a pretty long, hard battle, 2.5 years, and she ended up passing away during my 3rd year of medical school. And so because of some of those things, I took time off during medical school to be with her. I thought it was much more important that I spend my time with my family than worrying about studying for one particular test that I thought would be there even after she passed away. We knew that she was pretty sick. And so during my gap year, I ended up with some gap time. I had about 9 months. That wasn't quite a year after graduation and I did some research at that time. And that showed that I was both productive in my extra time that I had, and it also gave me a little bit of time to take care of some things, both in my personal life and outside of that. After my gap year, I attended residency. So I was applying to residencies all throughout the country, and I got a really good vibe from the program at OHSU, Oregon Health and Science University. So internal medicine residencies are 3 years. Residencies can run anywhere from 3 to 7 years to start. And many people will choose to do a fellowship beyond that. So for instance, if you want to be a cardiologist, then it's usually 3 years of internal medicine residency. You might add something called chief year on for a 4th year, and then fellowship is usually 3 years on top of that. And then just to give you a sense of how long their journey can be, there are some people that do multiple fellowships. So after they do a cardiology fellowship, they might want to do an interventional cardiology fellowship or an electrophysiology cardiology fellowship. And that can take you up to maybe 9 years after medical school, sometimes more. But I chose to do my residency in internal medicine. After that 3 years, I was able to come out and get a job. And that's what I chose to do. So I became a hospitalist at Rush University Medical Center. And initially I started out seeing patients 100% of the time, with some interest in some quality improvement projects. And over the last 4 or 5 years, I've really become very involved in the medical school. And I'll get into a little bit more of what that means in being involved. But there's a lot of teaching involved, admissions committee work, directing different rotations. And then I also serve as the medical director for our non-resident hospital medicine services. So medicine services, meaning the services that take care of patients, we divide up into services that are run by residents and those that are run by the attending physicians, which is the level you reach after you're a resident or fellow. As mentioned, I also do supervise on that resident service. And then I also am very, very much interested in quality improvement in healthcare and systems level changes, as well as how do we take care of ourselves as doctors, as medical students, as medical residents. Day to day, it's always nice to know, what does a doctor do day to day? I think many of you have probably had experience with a pediatrician, or maybe you do have family friends who are doctors and have seen what they do or gone to the emergency room. That's sometimes what I do, so it's different for me every day. Working in an academic hospital, it's different. One of the things I do is just see patients. I might be up at 6 something in the morning, get into work at 6:45 in the morning, see patients all day long, talking to them, coming with good plans, talking to other doctors about how we can advance their care. And that day can sometimes be quite long. It can be a 12 to 14-hour day at times. Sometimes, as I was doing this past week, I teach medical students in the classroom. And we go over some of the basic sciences and try to bring some clinical connection to what they're learning in the classroom. I also serve as a faculty advisor to students. So right now, some of the third-year medical students and I have known each other for a couple of years, and I'm really helping them figure out what they want to do for their 4th year of medical school, how they want to design their schedules, and as they think towards residency and applications, what that process might look like. As mentioned before, I also am on the admissions committee, and this involves reading through lots and lots of applications and essentially screening them to figure out who we might want to invite to campus. I interview people for entrance into medical school, and I vote on the admissions committee after looking at the entire application, the interview results, and essentially I will be one of many voters who says, yes, we would love to have this person come to our campus if they want to. Maybe they might have some things they could improve upon, or sometimes, unfortunately, we say, no, this person is not qualified or not a good fit for our medical school. Outside of that, as you can imagine, there are lots of meetings to make all of these different jobs run smoothly. And in the days of the internet, there's a lot of email to answer as well. So on to today's topic. The first part of this webinar was to really talk about my experiences. And the second part is really, what are some general themes that you can take away from this in order to potentially be successful in applying into medical school? So some of my qualifications, I've been on the admissions committee for 3 years now, and I've been interviewing for 5. So I've met many pre-medical students in this process. 2, I teach the first-year medical students. 3, I interact with 3rd and 4th-year medical students. They're the ones who have exited the classroom and are really on the wards with us, seeing patients with the residents and me as the attending. I teach the internal medicine residents during their 3 years of training. I myself have been seeing patients for the last 8 years. And of course, I also had my own journey applying to medical school. So I have some sense of what that's like, although that process does change slowly over time. And here are some just quick disclaimers that I mentioned in the beginning of the talk. But again, this is my opinion. It doesn't guarantee entrance into medical school. It's not an official guide from Rush Medical College. And it's important to know that even though I've given an example of my journey, we really do take individual situations into account. So there are many, many different paths to getting into medical school. And also, different medical schools may emphasize different things. So for instance, our medical college really likes to attract people who are very, very involved in their communities, involved in community service and in healthcare. Others might be more research heavy, for example. And those are things you should research as you look at which schools to apply to. Also, again, I always like to talk about challenges, because if I just paint a picture of how easy it was, it's not helpful to you. So personal challenge for me is that there were times that I felt ambivalent. There are people who for certainly know that they want to be a doctor and they have their eye on the prize and that's what they go for. But many of us who end up in medicine, there is some ambivalence about it. There's some, should I do this or should I do that? It is a very long journey. And when you're in your early 20s, right out of college, there are people who are getting jobs, making money. And when you're in medicine, you're studying, you're accruing loans. And then when you get out into residency, it's not a high pay initially. And certainly in the long term, I think it's a wonderful field. I've chosen to continue in this field, and my friends who are in medicine are also really happy with their jobs. But it is a long road, and it results in some need for delayed gratification. So there was that. There was this question of, should I get a job or should I go to medical school? I applied somewhat late in the cycle as a consequence of being a little uncertain, and that made it harder. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later as to why that might be, that when you apply later in the admission cycle, it's the same cycle, starts July of every year. If you apply later, you may lower your chances, even if you're the exact same person. 3, I wanted to comment that there's a component of luck in all of this. I was lucky specifically that I ended up getting accepted into medical school and ended up turning out to be a perfect job for me. And there's also a little bit of luck just in that process because there are many more qualified applicants than there are spots. So there has to be something that someone on the admissions committee sees that says, this person has a little sparkle. This person has that little extra something that makes us want to meet them, makes us want to see if they would train them and see if they would become a great doctor. And I also want to note that I did have support. So I had professors who were supportive, and most importantly, I had my parents who were supportive, because it is a tough journey. Getting into medical school is one thing, but you also have to get through medical school in order to become a doctor. And so having supportive parents was very, very helpful to me. I can say that I have met people whose parents were not supportive, and they have also done well, but then they need to make sure they have a good friend network or some kind of mentor in their life to help them in this process. And for me, I wanted to end on a positive note on this slide, that for me, being an academic physician, it's the perfect job and I love it. We are constantly engaging with different sorts of folks that I might not otherwise meet. It's a very dynamic job. There's always different patients. There's different things that we're doing. It's very challenging, it's engaging, and it's fun. And as I mentioned, there are some drawbacks. And so it's important to recognize that those exist and maybe even at least think about how you might manage to deal with those stresses. So, stepwise, you're thinking about going to medical school, maybe at some point down the line. Here are 6 things that I think are really important that I'd like you to remember. Number 1, you got to work hard. Number 2, we want you to be authentic. Be your true self, figure out who that is, and be able to present it. 3, get involved in your community and in healthcare. Make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. 4, practice, practice, practice. So it has to do with working hard, but there's a little bit more depth that needs to be achieved too. 5, seek feedback. Most people do well when they get feedback and figure out what their weaknesses are and improve upon those weaknesses, and also get feedback on the things you do well so that you, again, get a sense of your strengths and who you are. And 6, remember these odds and end tips. There were some things that I wanted to talk about that didn't quite fit into a nice, neat category, and so I put that at the end. Step 1, work hard. So do your homework, literally. Medicine, there's a component of intelligence that is certainly involved in becoming a successful medical student and physician. But there's also just a lot of grit. It's a lot of information, a lot of memorization, a lot of hours spent. So how much can you just put your nose to the ground and study, study, study? 2, you do need good grades from a good institution. So we will look at, for instance, did you get your degree from a 4-year medical college, or did you try to maybe take some easier classes at the community college? It does make a difference. Now, if you took classes at a community college because, for instance, you were working 2 jobs and financially your family couldn't afford a 4-year college, that's a very different story. But that's the kind of thing we're looking at, is that we do want to know that you can handle the workload. And so showing that you can take these classes at a 4-year college or in a post-baccalaureate after undergraduate classes, that would be fine too. I also wanted to comment that some people the first time don't do well. Maybe you got a bunch of C's for some reason in undergraduate. You didn't know how to study or something was going on in your life. There are some students who will take those classes again in this post-bac program to show that, well, there was at one time I struggled with these classes, but now I'm showing you that I can do it. 3, you do need a good MCAT. Most schools will have a minimum MCAT that they need to even consider you for their school. So make sure you look into what those minimum MCATs are, the scores, and one of the best ways to get good at tests is to just practice that test over and over and over again. You can read books, and it's good to look at the material and read it, but that kind of passive learning doesn't necessarily result in good test results. So one of the best things you can do is just practice those questions and get used to what the questions are like, not just what the material is like. And then 4th, you need some good experiences to talk about. So the interview in medical school or to get into medical school is often weighted very heavily. And so having some good experiences to talk about to show that you're interested and show that you understand the field is very critical. Little cartoon here, work hard now, pay off later. 2, be authentic. So we're really looking for people who are genuine. I don't want someone who's just checking off boxes. Be genuine, understand yourself and your story. Everyone has a different story. There's not just one path to get into medicine. And there's a lot of things in your life that you can't control. You can't control whether you came from a poor family or a wealthy family. But whatever your story is, you got to own it and you got to understand it. So that's why talking to other people, figuring out what your story is very important. Do the things that you love that can really help you be genuine. And by that, I don't mean things that I like watching TV and going shopping, but really the productive things that you love. So is it working at a homeless shelter? Is it tutoring children? Is it doing something exciting like working as a technician in an emergency setting? Figure out what you love and pursue that, because they're often transferable skills that you can show when you do the things that you love. And then when you talk about it, you're much more excited about it too. Be honest. So again, many of us who get into medical school, we're not perfect. We don't have like the absolute perfect application. Certainly there are some people that have pretty close to perfect applications, but most of us do not. And so it's important to open up about your flaws. If, for instance, you did stumble somewhere along the way, what I want to know is, did you learn something from it? If you did, then that can actually make you an even better doctor. That goes back to having grit, having resilience. And if you didn't learn anything from it, then that's a big red flag to me. And I might say, maybe this person needs a little bit more time. They need to learn their lessons first. And 5th, have a vision. We do like to know, what do you dream of? What kind of doctor do you want to be? Just having a medical degree doesn't mean you're tied to one specific job. There's lots of different jobs. What would that look like for you potentially? And we're not asking you to commit to a job and necessarily know in detail, but you want to have some kind of dream. 3, get involved in your community and in healthcare. So really show that you're engaged with those around you. We don't want people who just study all the time and don't really have a sense of the art of medicine. Medicine has both an art side and a science side. And the art side is sometimes equally, if not more important than the science. So getting involved in your community and really showing that you can be a leader in whatever world you live in is pretty important. 2, show that you understand what it means to be a doctor. Why do you want to be a doctor and not a nurse or a physical therapist or an occupational therapist or a pharmacist or a dentist? Those are all great fields too. Or why not be a social worker or a high school teacher? Make sure you understand exactly what it is that a doctor does and why being a doctor is a better fit for you than some of these other fields, if that's what you're choosing. Or maybe in that search, you'll discover, no, I actually really would like to be a bedside nurse, or I'd really like to be a pharmacist. And that's great too. Going through that thought process and that journey is very important. Make sure you understand what a doctor's daily work is like. So most of the good candidates have seen a variety of different kinds of doctors, what they do, what the challenges are in medicine, and what are some of the great things about medicine. Similarly, know what issues are facing the profession and the industry. Read the New York Times or journal articles or books about healthcare. It's important to be informed, again, because you're making an investment in yourself and we're making an investment in you. And 4th, have a personal experience, some personal experience being a provider. Certainly, we know that you're limited in your options when you don't have a medical background, but there are some people who, even in the pre-medical stage, learn how to take a blood pressure or learn how to take a basic history and can help out in clinics. It's a little bit better if you're doing something active than if you are just shadowing. Shadowing is helpful too, but shadowing is more for you to observe, and anyone can shadow. Awkward people can shadow, and people who are not nice could shadow, for instance. Whereas if you do things like work as a EMT and emergency medical technician, if you are interacting with patients on a regular basis, that's a little bit more information for you and for us who are looking at your applications about your suitability for being a doctor. 4, practice, practice, practice. So show depth to your experiences. Certainly, many applications will include some community service, some healthcare experience, some research. We do like to know that people have achieved some depth, though. So it's not just you spent 20 hours here, 20 hours there, and 20 hours on doing this other thing. You're not just checking off a box, but really the successful applicants have dedicated hundreds to thousands of hours to an activity. Obviously, those come straight out of undergraduate might have fewer hours than those who have taken time off, and we take that into account. But either way, you need to spend quite a bit of time doing the things that you care about. And we want you to demonstrate that you can handle that heavy workload. Secondly, do your research. So again, why medical school? Why did you apply to that particular medical school? There are many medical schools and you can't apply to all of them for the most part. It would be too exhausting. So which schools did you pick and why did you pick them? What's so special about those schools? And how does that school fit with your dreams and who you are? And of course, know why do you plan to get your medical degree? So do your research, and that's part of the practice. Lastly, show grit. So what hardships have you faced in your life and what have you learned? We need people who can handle stress. Medicine is very, very stressful. You're managing people who are sick. You're managing people who are concerned. You're managing people who might be dying. And that's obviously in many ways very, very stressful. It's also very rewarding at the same time, but we like to know that people can handle stress and overcome their hardships. So practice, practice, practice. Step 5, seek feedback. So again, nobody does this alone, and we don't expect you to. Find mentors, find people around you who can help guide you. Ask for constructive suggestions with regards to any weaknesses that you have. And then depending on what you identify as weaknesses, grow and develop yourself. So some people will look at their application and say, gosh, I have great grades and great scores, but I haven't really interacted with that many doctors. And it'll be important to do that. Or other people might have had a variety of good experiences, but maybe their MCAT's not so high, so they might need to retake it again. Things like that, really good to think about. And some people, I have everything on the application on paper, maybe I need to practice my interviewing skills. So there are a variety of things that with mentorship, with pre-medical advisors, if you're lucky to have them, or with the doctors that you're shadowing, you might be able to get good feedback and improve yourself. Lastly, odds and end tips. So what are we looking for? And they're the characteristics that you would expect you would want in your doctor. So we want doctors, or we want really students who are going to be then doctors, who are leaders, who are going to change the world and have that drive. We're looking for people who communicate well. Medicine, again, is not just a field about science. There's an art to it, and that's a lot of the communication skills that come into play. For instance, if I need to communicate well in order for my patients to understand what disease is affecting their body, why they should take the medicines that we're recommending or the treatment that we're recommending, and who should they call if they have any questions, things like that. Because medicine has lots of challenges in it and the field is very complicated, we need people who are creative. It's a very expensive field, and we're trying to figure out how we can keep costs down. We're trying to figure out how we can maybe simplify this complex system. So we need people who are creative. We need people who are compassionate. So again, as people are sick and maybe they're dying or maybe they're getting better, we need people who can show compassion to those who are going through a tough time in their life, or compassion even for those who are just trying to get their life better. Maybe it's not so bad, but there's still little things they can improve. whether it's improving their vision or losing a little bit of weight or getting their blood pressure under better control, things like that. We like people who contribute to their community. So again, being involved and being personable and being active. We are looking for people who are hard work and resilient, again, to manage those stresses. We are looking for people who know when to ask for help. So again, this goes back to you can't do it by yourself. You could do it by yourself, but it's harder to be successful when you are completely alone. So know when to ask for help, know what your weaknesses are, know how to improve on them. Medicine is a field where we often say it's lifelong learning. We're always learning. I learned a lot in medical school, I learned a lot in residency, and I'm still learning right now as an attending. And of course, you really just have to have a fundamental passion for medicine itself versus something else. There are people who might be more suited for business, might be more suited for teaching, might be more suited to be a PhD and a professor, or any number of things. There are many very valuable fields out there, and the world needs lots of really great people in all these different fields. Also, odds and ends tips specific to the application. So number one, take your MCAT early. This way, you know you have this basic score either all set, or if you have to take it again, you give yourself time to do so. 2, get letters of recommendation for people who know you well. You need somewhere between 3 and 6. If your school has a pre-medical committee that can write a committee letter, have them do that if possible. We look at letters really to see, does this person who's writing about our applicant know them well? Sometimes we get some very generic letters that don't say much at all. They took my class, they got this grade, they seemed okay. And other times we get these long, very, very lovely letters really saying how wonderful somebody is and giving specific examples and stories about what really impressed that letter writer. 3, apply early. So this is a mistake that I made. I applied probably in September, maybe a little bit after. And it's one of those things where the early bird gets the worm. As you can imagine, the number of applications that a medical school is seeing in July is markedly less than the number that they see in September. Or when applications close, it's November. And that means the July applications are getting reviewed first. That means they're getting invited to interviews first, which means they're more likely to get an acceptance early. When you start to apply later, your application is mixed in with thousands of other applications, and sometimes it's hard to even get your application seen. So apply early. And if you're not ready to apply that year, then maybe consider taking a year off before applying so that you can apply in July. Really consider what you would do as a backup if you don't get into medical school. So if you purely look at the numbers, there are many people who apply and do not get into medical school. So you need to have a backup plan. Would you pursue a different career? Would you figure out what your weaknesses were and then reapply? What would you do if you didn't get into medical school? And actually, admissions committees will sometimes ask you, what would you do if you didn't get in? 5, practice interviewing. So most of us are not natural at talking about ourselves, talking about our interests. It's not something we do every day with our friends or with our family or with our teachers. So there is a certain skill that's involved in interviewing. Shaking someone's hand firmly, making good eye contact, making sure your suit fits properly, and also just anticipating all the questions that get asked. There are some pretty standard questions that get asked, and there's lots of resources out there to help you hone that interview skill. And also there's generally people out there who are willing to do practice interviews. So make sure that if you have a pre-med committee that you ask about that. Also, if this is your dream, keep working at it. So don't let a single rejection deter you. I can say that we have many students who have been rejected in the past or waitlisted in the past and never quite got that full acceptance, who end up being phenomenal med students, phenomenal residents, and really great teachers. And they just took them a little bit more time to get there, but they're still great for the field. And also, lastly, recognize that the field is not good for you. Medicine is not suitable for everybody. It may turn out that after all this research and all this work, you find out this is not actually what I want to do, or not something that really fits me. And that's okay too. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of great jobs out there. There are a lot of great ways to help society. There are a lot of great ways to contribute and a lot of great ways to be successful. So to summarize, you're thinking about going to medical school. 1, work hard. 2, be authentic. 3, get involved in your community and healthcare. 4, practice, practice, practice. 5, seek feedback. And 6, remember some of these odds and end tips. I have some important links. If you do have interest in learning more, the the Association of American Medical Colleges has a section on their website for aspiring doctors. You can Google this. I think this Speak Mentorship will eventually provide links. If you're looking at specific medical schools, the MSAR, so the Medical School Admission Requirements, is a good place to start. This way you can figure out, are my scores good enough? Is my GPA good enough for this school? As you can imagine, there's a variety of medical schools with different levels of competitiveness. And so the MSAR can be very helpful. And then for more blog style, kind of down on the ground details, Student Doctor Network is a great place where a lot of students are posting about their experiences, maybe interviewing at one school or what they needed in order to be successful. And if you find that you don't have mentors in your own life or people you can get advice from, sometimes this is a nice resource to go to get some ideas. I also think it's always great to be reading about medicine in addition to experiencing it. So someone who was influential for me was Perry Klass. She's a pediatrician, I believe, at the Harvard hospitals, and she wrote some really great books about medical school and residency. Rita Sharon's a professor at Columbia who she was very involved in things like narrative medicine. So again, some of the softer side of medicine that's really no less important and maybe more important sometimes than the sciences that I had mentioned. Not to discount the sciences at all. They are also very, very important. There are some men who've written some great books, Atul Gawande, Jerome Groupman, Paul Kalanithi, and Oliver Sacks, that really get into different interesting cases in medicine, sometimes more of a systems issues in medicine, and their writing is all very good. The New England Journal of Medicine has an article about letters to a young female physician. So there are some issues that women in medicine face that sometimes may differ from men. And it's sometimes good to note some of these differences. And the New York Times is often posting all sorts of articles about medicine. Daniela Lamas was actually my intern when I was a medical student, and she often will write for the New York Times in their wellness and opinion sections. And there are many other physician writers that I haven't listed here that are great. So a quick Google search, you can often find some really wonderful writers. Concluding remarks and takeaways. So again, in the beginning, we talked about my journey. So I'm a child of Asian immigrants, grew up in the Midwest, middle-class family. There are many paths to medicine. So your job is to find your story. It doesn't have to be a straight line. You can take little detours, and sometimes that's what makes it more interesting to talk to you in an interview, and that's okay. Sometimes that's good. No matter what your path, there are some common themes, though. Everyone who gets to our stage, it's been a lot of hard work. They've done a lot to prepare. They have shown people that they're pretty authentic. They're very involved in their community. They're obviously very involved in healthcare. And most of us have found good mentors in our life to help give us advice, review personal statements, review our resumes, review what we've done, things like that. And just given us sometimes general life advice to give some perspective. And those of you who are watching this, you're clearly on the right path, because if you weren't interested in mentorship, you wouldn't be here. So it's so great that you are. Good luck on your journey, wherever it may take you. I wish you all the best. If you have any questions, my contact information is listed right here. Those of you with a little extra funding, or even if not, it's good to learn about donations and consider donating to Speak Mentorship, especially if you found this talk helpful. And next up will be Priyanka Mara. She's an architect in San Francisco, and I'm sure her talk will be fabulous.
Thank you, Kristen, for that. It was a very informative talk, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm just going to see in our chat if we have some questions waiting.
Okay.
And I had a question before that, and you spoke about knowing if medicine is something that you want to do before you actually do it.
Yeah.
So I felt like that was like really important in determining the path that you took to medicine. So can somebody just wake up later on in life and decide that medicine would be a good fit for them without having some of those prior experiences that would make them a good candidate?
So to clarify, your question is, let's say you didn't know you wanted to be a doctor, and 5 years, 10 years down the line, you decide you do. Is that possible to become a physician? Absolutely, yes. I've had a colleague who was I think he was in engineering for 20 years before he decided, I don't really like my job. I really want to be a physician. And he was then in his 40s. Now, there are some basic requirements that he still had to do. So that means in his 40s, he had to take the pre-medical classes. Then he had to go to medical school. Then he had to go to residency, which is where I met him. He was 20 years older than me in residency, doing the same thing that I was doing when I was in my 20s. And then now he's a practicing physician in Hawaii, and he's having a great life. And so it is definitely possible. And certainly that was a more extreme example, but there's many people who will take 3, 4, 5 years off. Maybe they majored in English and did not take any of the pre-med classes. They'll go back and take those post-baccalaureate programs. There's many programs that offer this where you can just focus on the pre-medical classes, take them. They often come with advisors who will help write those letters of recommendation, who will help connect you with mentoring or shadowing resources or clinical experiences. So there's actually many people who take time off before even applying for medical school. And we like them because they bring something else to the table. Whether you've done Peace Corps or you had a job maybe even like Priyanka Mara, you were an architect for a while and decided, no, I really want to be in medicine. That arguably makes you more interesting because as you think about it, hospitals need to be designed too, so some of that background can be helpful. You're a teacher, that could make you someone who's really great in an academic center, or even if you don't want to have anything to do with the thing that you did in your previous life, that's totally fine too. But yes, long story short, if you come to this realization later that you want to be a doctor, absolutely there's a place for you.
Okay, that was a good response, thank you. And I was thinking, you said something about being authentic and writing really good motivation letters. Is there anything like sharing too much information, and how can people share that information in a positive light without really? Some stories are tragic, and we don't want that to reflect negatively on them. So how can people do that?
So this is where there's a difference between mentorship and your letter writer. Your mentor may not be that person to write letters for you. Your mentor ideally should be someone that you trust, who has your best interests in mind to give you true advice, but is not the person who's necessarily trying to advocate for you as well. That's the person you go to say, this is my issue. I need to know how I should present it. So for one, in the medical school application, there actually is a whole section dedicated to, if you want to talk about if you had a disadvantage, there's actually a space for it. Because a disadvantage is not necessarily something, in some ways it's something that reflects, it may not reflect well on you, but it doesn't necessarily reflect badly on you. So for instance, I read many applications where people either very unfortunately grew up in families of abuse, or maybe one parent had mental health issues growing up, or maybe they didn't have any money and I was reading one just yesterday, they were on food stamps. I have many applications come through where they didn't have health insurance growing up. These are not things that anyone's really proud of, right? People are not proud necessarily to be on food stamps, or coming from families that don't have much money, or coming from families where their parents maybe weren't the best parents. There's actually a space for that because, someone who's coming from that background, who then their achievements are seen in a different light, in some ways more positive. We look at something called distance traveled. And that is, if you're coming from a place where your parents didn't go to high school and maybe they're not really around, and now you're the first to graduate from college in your class, and you have achieved great grades and all these things, that is very impressive. And we will compare that to someone who, let's say they come from a 2-physician family and they've had every resources handed to them. Doesn't mean their life has been easy, right? Even wealthy people, even people from good backgrounds have challenges in their life. So this is not to belittle that by any stretch of the imagination. But there's a difference. Someone who's had 2 physicians in their family, I expect a lot more. I expect them to have higher grades. I expect them to have done more activities because of where they came from, if that sort of makes sense. So I think it's important to talk to your mentors about your specific situation, how you should present it, and then you would know how to approach your letter writer, for instance. And so I don't. Hopefully that answers your question a little bit. I think it's finding the difference between those two people, the people who have your back and the people that you want to look good in front of, so that you can put your best application forward. And this is where practicing interviewing helps, because it's not that easy to talk about our hardships. So you need to talk about it in this way that's balanced, that both is somewhat matter of fact about it, and not to, you don't want to come across as like you're whining about your history, or that you are super ashamed of your history, because it made you who you are today, for whatever it's worth. And then lastly, if it's a hardship that's something like you didn't get good grades, or you failed a class even, then maybe there was no reason for it, right? No external reason, like it didn't have to do anything to do with family, it was just purely on you. Then it's important that you are able to talk about what you learned, how you improved it. And most of us are human and we make mistakes, and mistakes by themselves are not inherently bad. It's if you've never learned from your mistake, that is a bad thing. And if you learn from it, it arguably makes you more interesting and better able to help people who are also struggling. Makes you more empathetic.
Okay, thank you for that. And talking about good grades, we have Kristen, and she says, "Hi, my name is Kristen. I'm a junior at American History High. I wanted to ask, how often did you study a week?"
So this goes to the ideal thing is to study every day. Although I would say, they say that I'm not particularly religious, but Sundays are a day of rest. It's also good to rest some. I think that the key is to be mindful of when you are trying to be focused and when you are trying to just relax. Sometimes we are much more effective after we've had a little bit of fun. As you can imagine, if you work all the time every day, if you studied for a month straight and didn't take a single break, by the end, you're not going to be very efficient in your studying. You're not going to be very focused in your studying. So part of it is, let's see, how do I put this? It kind of depends on the class. It kind of depends on how easily you understand the material. And then there's a component of, you probably do want to spend a regular amount of time studying, whether it's like an hour a day or 2 hours a day, depending on the class. And then make sure that you do take some time for self-care, whether that's to go for a run, or to get your hair done, or to socialize with friends and have coffee with a girlfriend, go to the movies, things like that. It's important to take some time to do those things. And it depends on your grades. So for instance, if you're getting straight A's, there are people who can have a lot of time for leisure because everything just comes very naturally to them. And there are some people who, it's a little bit harder. Maybe this particular class, your brain just doesn't work that way, and it may just take you a little extra effort. And maybe during that time, you might not spend as much time having fun. You might spend more time studying.
Okay. I think it does. And she also asked, just a little, Lena. She also asked, how often did you research programs or scholarships for your career?
I'm not sure she's asking for college or for medical school, but it always pays to do your research and talking to people. So it's a combination. If you want to figure out like what's a good fit for you, it's usually a combination. So some of the research that I listed for medical school, you could apply the same to colleges. Right, there's certainly U.S. News and World Reports, which gives you a basic understanding of colleges, but it really doesn't, in the sense that they look at a very specific formula and rank based off of that formula. The ranking at U.S. News doesn't tell you what's a good fit for you as a person. Some people do fine in big state schools with lots of people and lots of school pride, and they like, being a part of a huge community that has that kind of pride. Whereas other people do much better in small classrooms with individual attention where they get to know people, especially if you're a little bit shy. You might do a little bit better in a small community rather than a big one. Whereas you're sort of loud and outgoing and boisterous, a big state school might be the perfect place for you. And similarly with scholarships, then Googling scholarships can be helpful. Thinking about which schools might have bigger endowments to offer more financial aid if you're in that kind of position. And then talking to people. So like when I was applying to colleges, my mom's work had a scholarship that you could apply for. And it was open to children of employees. So I applied to that, and that really helped with my college tuition. Similarly for medical schools, there's a variety of costs. Medical school is very expensive for tuition, but certain state schools can be cheaper, for instance. Certain schools may give more scholarship than others. So these are things to look into as you're applying.
Okay. And we have another question, and it says, is it necessary to take AP classes in high school?
It depends on where you're coming from. So I can say that some people probably didn't even have any AP classes offered in high school. I would say most students probably do have AP classes to give them credits. But ultimately, what's most important is that you get good grades in college and in your pre-medical classes, because that's what we look at the most strongly. So even among your college courses, I'll look at your overall GPA in college, your grade point average, but I also look at more specifically, well, how did you do in the sciences? Because if your grades overall are great, but your science class GPA is not very good, I get very concerned about your ability to handle the work in medical school. I will note that many applicants coming through, I do see some AP credits on their college transcripts. But I don't know that it's a deal breaker, because if you came from a place that didn't have AP classes, what are you going to do about it? You can't do anything about it. You didn't necessarily choose which high school you went to. That wasn't something within your control. And we don't want to penalize people for things that were outside of their control. But we penalize people for those things that are within their control that they have not managed or dealt with, if that sort of makes sense. The key is to take advantage of all the resources that are available to you specifically as a person in your situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Great question.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for that. I've really enjoyed having this talk with you, and I'm sure the others and our audience really enjoyed it too, and they found it very informative, like I did. So any other questions? I don't see any, so I think we're going to end here for today. So thank you for joining us, everybody, and make sure you join us next month on the 24th. We're going to have Bianca Mara. She's a practicing architect in San Francisco, and she has designed some of Apple stores in the city there. So it's going to be great to have her here. And make sure you tune in next time. Thank you, Dr. Kristen. It was great.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Good luck, everybody.